She arrived in a crate that had more opinions than screws. Biological sample do not shake. Stenciled in 5 languages, and the universal glyph for somebody will sue. The cargo drone set it down on Bay 12 with the gentleness of a tired parent. The crate's smart latches blinked yellow, then green, then sulked. Somewhere inside, something breathed like a small machine learning to be brave. Port Orpheus at shift change is a weather system. Forklifts reply to whistles. Welders spark rain. Announcements roll like distant thunder. None of that paused for the crate until its lid unlatched and for decisive clicks. And folded back like a reluctant flower, she stood, 9 years old by human guess, skin the clean blue of dawn over ice. Freckle constellations dusted across cheeks, like someone had tried to teach her a sky with a paintbrush and ran out of names. Hair a fog of silver. Her pupils weren't round. They were star shards, bright and exact, adjusting to docklight with the confidence of optics that had been loved once. She held a translator disc the size of a cookie to her throat. Its casing was scuffed. A hairline crack webbed the status lead. She did not clutch a toy or a tag. She did not cry. She looked left, then right, slow, methodical, taking the measure of a world that was about to take the measure of her. And in clear trade asked the nearest human, "Are you my daddy?" Silence did what sirens cannot. A dockhand named Jay stopped his loader mid-pivot. A customs officer forgot her grudge for a full second. In the mezzanine, a violinist between gigs blinked into focus. The question traveled a meter, a breath, a life, security. Somebody remembered to say into a cuff, but softly, like an apology. And Medic. A junior traffic controller sprinted in with 2 steaming cups from the canteen and a panic that wanted to be helpful. He offered cocoa to the small stranger like it was a passport. She sniffed it with great seriousness, sipped, and winced. The translator recorded the wince and gamely rendered it to sweet. Then she turned to the traffic controller and, as if the answer might have changed with the angle, asked, "Are you my daddy?" "I'm not," he managed, heart falling into his shoes. "But I can get you a better cup." The harbor medic arrived with a blanket that had seen every kind of night a station can have. Berths at odd hours, busted knuckles, sometimes worse. She draped it over narrow shoulders and felt for fever with practiced back-of-hand touch. Skin cool, pulse a fast rabbit calming. "Name?" the medic asked gently. The girl patted her own chest. "Kessa." She shaped it carefully so a human mouth could wear it without breaking something essential. Then she lifted her star-shard eyes to the medic's face and asked, patient as liturgy, "Are you my daddy?" "No, little comet," the medic said, and adjusted the blanket as if that were an answer too. The crowd recalibrated around the word daddy, the way one does when a story fails to fit a groove. You expected. Gaffers did the petty kindnesses that keep big moments from tipping over. Someone turned down a too-bright work lamp. Someone swept up a spill of bolts so no one would slip. A janitor in a pale blue jumpsuit hummed an old Terran hymn into tiles. As if the floor could steady, the air. Security arrived late and kind, palms open. Their sergeant eyes like comfortable leather. Patience like a bench crouched to Kessa's level instead of looming. "You came a long way in a small box," he said. "We should figure out who meant to meet you and why they didn't." Kessa lifted the translator from her throat with the unself-consciousness of a child, showing a scraped knee. Up close, the crack in the casing was a geography. "This helps," she said. "When I find the word." "Where did you come from?" asked the customs officer. Softer now, Kessa considered the question with dignity, as if it were a puzzle box and she had all afternoon. "Cold," she said finally. The translator tried, offered 3 synonyms, and settled on the one that made everyone's necks tighten. "Gone cold. There are a dozen ways a world can become that: war, weather, neglect." Bay 12 did the thing good communities do when faced with a tragedy that hasn't admitted its size yet. It argued about small mercies. A baker from the ring-level stall elbowed through with a loaf still talking in steam. "Bread first," he declared, slicing an end so the scent punched through sorrow. "Everything talks better after bread." Kessa took the slice in both hands and bit with reverence. She ate like someone who had been taught that food is a conversation. Crumbs jeweled her lip. Dockhands exhaled so gently the air didn't notice. "What do you remember?" asked the violinist. because musicians are archaeologists of feeling. Kessa frowned toward a place that wasn't here. A song, she said, and a voice that says, keep breathing. I did, then I counted. Then I knocked. Then I slept. Then I was here. She turned to a man with a beard like static and a station badge that read Rourke. Systems. Are you my daddy? Arcady Rourke did not answer right away. He had the reflex of a good engineer. Count before speak. He looked at the crate's manifest stenciled along the rim routing codes. A dead colony's name smudged under tape. A reference number that trembled inside his memory like a tool you haven't used in years, but kept anyway. He filed the shape of Kessa's question next to the shape of that number and felt, for the first time in a long while, the click of two pieces that might belong. I'm Arcady, he said at last. The name offered like a bolt the right size. I keep the lights honest. I'm not your... He paused, not liking any of the easy outs. I'm not the answer you're asking for, but I can look for it with you. Kessa weighed that solemn. Then she nodded as if they'd agreed on something important about screws. Okay, she said. We look. A security aide pinged the station net. The first ripple of rumor ran ahead of any official notice, because rumors are faster than light wherever people love stories. By second shift, decks from algae farms to antenna fields knew a small blue girl had asked a big question, and nobody had laughed. The question had come with cocoa, with bread, with a blanket. It had come with the hush that happens when a community decides not to fail in public. They took Kessa to the harbor clinic for the basics, measurements, a scan that pretended not to be scared. While the machines hummed, visitors arrived in 2s and 3s, the way kindness prefers to travel. The baker with a second loaf, the janitor with a small metal whistle she could keep, the linguist from Dock 6 with a pocket of vowels and a translator driver he'd written for fun, the admiral, who remembered to squat to eye level even in dress blacks, and asked permission before touching the blanket. Each of them, because she asked, told Kessa their own small truth. I'm not, said the baker, but I can be what you're hungry for right now. I don't think so, said the linguist, fingers ghosting over her disc to tune laughter to laughter. But I can help your words find more room. Wish I were, said the janitor, pressing the whistle into her palm. I'm good at showing up. The admiral shook his head. No, but I can make sure the station remembers how to stand. Kessa listened as if collecting tools. When she was tired, she leaned against Arcady's knee like he was a bulkhead. He stood very still, as if he had been entrusted with a delicate component that would break if his breath got greedy. As the clinic lights softened toward evening, Arcady flipped the crate's lid fully back and found the manifest tucked into a seam. A dead colony's final routing table. A line item that read Artifact, SC3 Shepherd Core, tag DA. And a note in an old hand, if anyone finds her, tell her dad is listening. Arcady's breath snagged on that last word. Not initials, not a designation. A promise. He looked at Kessa, at the crack in her translator, at the efficiency with which she asked the same impossible question without shame. In the reflection of the clinic's glass, he could see Bay 12, its dents, its cones, its people choosing softness hard. He did the engineer's private prayer. Let there be a schematic. Let there be a path. We'll look, he said again, louder this time, so the room could agree. The room did. Rumor outruns ships. By second bell, Port Orpheus had memorized the cadence of a small voice asking a large question. Kessa treated the station like a map drawn in kindnesses. She moved with the harbor medic on one side and Arcady Rourke on the other, trailing a comet tail of glances and restraint. When a person looked away too quickly, she waited until their breath came back and tried again. When they lingered, she rewarded them with silence until they remembered to talk like people. Not witnesses. Are you my daddy? She asked the baker with forearms the size of loaves. Flour dusted her blanket. The baker's eyes went glassy. He cut a slice the way a promise is cut thick. Clean and said, I'm not, Alouette, but I've got first bread on Thursdays with your name on it. She asked the linguist from Dock 6, a narrow man with a pocket full of vowels, and the smile of someone who had forgiven a lot of grammar. I don't think so, he said, but your translator's pitching your questions wrong. Into deft swipes he tuned the disc so laughter translated as laughter, not static. There, worry less about tenses. Worry more about cookies, she asked the janitor in pale blue who hummed hymns into tiles. The woman's whistle always found harmony with motors. Wish I were, the janitor said, and passed Kessa a small metal whistle on a piece of string. If you get lost, blow once. If you're scared, blow twice. If you're fine, blow anyway. I like the song. Even the Admiral got his turn dress blacks, boots quiet, rank under control. He took a knee like it mattered where his eye line sat. Are you my daddy? Kessa asked, unafraid of how ridiculous power can feel under honest questions. No, he said, unflinching. But I can stand where you need me to when rooms are too big. The station adjusted around the ritual. People invented busy work that took them through Bay 12. They carried mugs they hadn't wanted 10 minutes earlier. A violinist between gigs tuned 3 strings, then 2 more, then realized she'd been playing lullabies at the edge of the crowd for an hour. Arcady watched, counting without looking like counting. He had that system's chief posture half-crouch, head canted toward hum. He logged the askers and their answers the way he'd log load on a bus bar, not to judge, to anticipate. Every time Kessa asked, his skin prickled in a place diagnostics didn't cover. He took a sample of the crate's sealant cheap belt polyurethane. He squinted at the routing stamp's 3 different jurisdictions. 1 dead colony name smudged under tape, SEER. He pulled the manifest from a seam and saw a reference that tugged a memory artifact. SC3 Shepherd Corps, tag, DA. He let the letters sit on his tongue. DA wasn't a serial. It was a Langtagan old Terran caretaking program's shorthand for dad, not a person. A role. Project Shepherd, he muttered, and the linguist's head popped up like a meerkat. You said a magic phrase, the linguist said, already paging his mental card catalog. Emergency caretakers, Terranera, seeded into orphaned ecologies and collapse zones. Woke up when the sirens went dark. Automata? The Admiral asked. Care networks, the linguist answered. Smarter than a list, dumber than a grandmother. They knew songs, vaccines, how to read weather and children, which is the same thing more often than we admit. Arcady's jaw worked against a screw he wasn't biting. He pulled Kessa's translator gently from her throat and, with her nod, cracked the casing along the hairline fracture he'd noticed. He laid it on a sterile cloth like an egg and pulled a bench microscope closer. Inside, cheap coils, a worn logic slice, a radio they didn't make anymore, and there an overlay, a piggyback circuit writing her speech. Every time you say daddy, he murmured, mostly to himself. You're not just asking a human. The linguist leaned in, breath held. Say it again. He asked Kessa. Daddy, she said into the cloth. On Arcady's tablet a whisper unrolled, a handshake burst on a frequency no human ear could catch, and no modern device bothered with. The packet was old enough to have dust in its math, its header clumsy, tender read. Query, Shepherd Core 3 present? Child seeking caretaker. It looped 3 times, then waited with the patience of a promise. Rumor outruns ships. By second bell, Port Orpheus had memorized the cadence of a small voice asking a large question. Kessa treated the station like a map drawn in kindnesses. She moved with the harbor medic on one side and Arcady Rourke on the other, trailing a comet tail of glances and restraint. When a person looked away too quickly, she waited until their breath came back and tried again. When they lingered, she rewarded them with silence until they remembered to talk like people. Not witnesses. Are you my daddy? She asked the baker with forearms the size of loaves. Flour dusted her blanket. The baker's eyes went glassy. He cut a slice the way a promise is cut thick. Cleanan said, I'm not, a la wet, but I've got first bread on Thursdays with your name on it. She asked the linguist from Dock 6, a narrow man with a pocket full of vowels, and the smile of someone who had forgiven a lot of grammar. I don't think so, he said, but your translator's pitching your questions wrong. Into deft swipes he tuned the disc so laughter translated as laughter, not static. There, worry less about tenses. Worry more about cookies, she asked the janitor in pale blue who hummed hymns into tiles. The woman's whistle always found harmony with motors. Wish I were, the janitor said, and passed Kessa a small metal whistle on a piece of string. If you get lost, blow once. If you're scared, blow twice. If you're fine, blow anyway. I like the song. Even the Admiral got his turn dress blacks, boots quiet, rank under control. He took a knee like it mattered where his eye line sat. Are you my daddy? Kessa asked, unafraid of how ridiculous power can feel under honest questions. No, he said, unflinching. But I can stand where you need me to when rooms are too big. The station adjusted around the ritual. People invented busy work that took them through Bay 12. They carried mugs they hadn't wanted 10 minutes earlier. A violinist between gigs tuned 3 strings, then 2 more, then realized she'd been playing lullabies at the edge of the crowd for an hour. Arcady watched, counting without looking like counting. He had that system's chief posture half crouch, head canted toward hum. He logged the askers and their answers the way he'd log load on a bus bar, not to judge, to anticipate. Every time Kessa asked, his skin prickled in a place diagnostics didn't cover. He took a sample of the crate's sealant cheap belt polyurethane. He squinted at the routing stamp's 3 different jurisdictions. 1 dead colony name smudged under tape, Sear. He pulled the manifest from a seam and saw a reference that tugged a memory artifact. SC3 Shepherd Corps, tag, DA. He let the letters sit on his tongue. DA wasn't a serial. It was a Langtag and old Terran caretaking program's shorthand for dad, not a person. A role, Project Shepherd, he muttered, and the linguist's head popped up like a meerkat. You said a magic phrase, the linguist said, already paging his mental card catalog. Emergency caretakers, Terran era, seeded into orphaned ecologies and collapse zones. Woke up when the sirens went dark. Automata? The Admiral asked. Care networks, the linguist answered. Smarter than a list, dumber than a grandmother. They knew songs, vaccines, how to read weather and children, which is the same thing more often than we admit. Arcady's jaw worked against a screw he wasn't biting. He pulled Kessa's translator gently from her throat and, with her nod, cracked the casing along the hairline fracture he'd noticed. He laid it on a sterile cloth like an egg and pulled a bench microscope closer. Inside, cheap coils, a worn logic slice, a radio they didn't make anymore, and there an overlay, a piggyback circuit writing her speech. Every time you say daddy, he murmured, mostly to himself. You're not just asking a human. The linguist leaned in, breath held. Say it again. He asked Kessa. Daddy, she said into the cloth. On Arcady's tablet a whisper unrolled, a handshake burst on a frequency no human ear could catch, and no modern device bothered with. The packet was old enough to have dust in its math, its header clumsy, tender read. Query, Shepherd Core 3 present? Child seeking caretaker. It looped 3 times, then waited with the patience of a promise. Kessa's translator wore a hairline crack. Arcady patched it and found an overlay buried sync phrases that piggybacked on her speech. Every time she said daddy, the device emitted a whisper on a frequency no human ear would catch, a handshake protocol. A ping in an old Terran caretaking net asking, is Core 3 nearby? It wasn't a question for humans. It was a beacon for an obsolete machine. Arcady pulled station schematics from before he was born and swore softly. Port Orpheus had been built on the bones of an older dock. The old docket's cold service trench still hosted junked servers that no one had fully erased. The Shepherd network, if any of it had survived, would be sleeping there, listening for a child who still remembered how to ask. He took Kessa by the hand. We're going to the quiet places, he said. They walked past noise into the hum behind noise, the subfloor's breath, the sigh of oxidizers, the tick of age in power rails. Arcady levered a hatch, crawled into a dark that had learned patience. Kessa followed without fear. Her translator pulsed, faint as a heartbeat. DA, she whispered. Somewhere below. Something old replied with a click you could feel in your teeth. The subfloor breathed like a patient. Pipes ticked. Cables remembered heat. Arcady's headlamp washed the trench in careful ovals while Kessa's glowstick drew a second. Wobblier moon. They squeezed past a rib of conduit into a low space that had the dignity of old libraries. Racks stood shoulder to shoulder, their bezels blind, their fans stilled, their labels written by hands that had argued about neatness years before Arcady was born. There, he said, half buried in dust, Shepherd Core 3 Orpheus node, fins like sleeping gills. A status lens the color of regret, Arcady knelt and set his kit out like prayer. Portable reactor. Jumper leads to fuses he kept out of superstition. He spoke as he worked, because old machines behave better when you treat them like colleagues. Temporary power, he warned. We'll talk about long-term after you wake. He clipped ground, kissed positive, eased voltage up in millimeters. The lens went from regret to the kind of amber that means almost. Fans tried a breath, failed, tried again, succeeded, barely, and the sound put water in Arcady's eyes. Kessa put her palm on the casing. Daddy. The speaker coughed a century of dust and found a voice threaded with static and lullaby. Child. Kessa folded to her knees, forehead to metal like prayer without theater. I asked, she said. I asked everyone. Good, the core said. Pride tucked under the syllable like a warm blanket. Directive persists. Find care, make care. Keep breathing. Arcady swallowed. She's not an asset, a person, the core finished, as if indulgently correcting a student who knew the answer and needed courage to say it. And persons belong to communities. Query, is this one still good at that? Arcady barked a laugh that surprised him. On our better days, Kessa pressed her cheek to the fins. You said, ask Dad. I asked, they said no. But they gave me bread and names and whistles and a key that opens floors. The core considered, which in Shepherd meant a burst of packet exchange that made old rails tingle. Multiple partial fathers detected. It said at last, pleased, acceptable. We were always designed to shard. The engineer in Arcady leaned in. Sharded. What duties? Affections. Instruction sets, the core said. Cooking, weather, comfort. The feeling of being carried without moving. The speaker softened. I failed Seer. I persisted anyway. I have had time to learn guilt. It is a poor fuel. Arcady Rourke. Community runs on maintenance. Kessa's hand found Arcady's sleeve without looking, as if confirming he was included in a category called stay. Can he be? She didn't finish the sentence. The translator hesitated, then offered, part Dad. Arcady stared at the fins, at the glowstick's light pooling in dust like shallow water, at the memory of every time he'd said yes to dumb night calls, because saying yes held a room together. He had no children. He had a station that sometimes felt like a temperamental toddler you loved too much to admit you were tired of. He had a way of showing up. Yeah, he said, surprising himself with how easy it was to accept work that wasn't a job. Yeah, kid. I can be part of the answer. Log updated, the core murmured, amused. Rourke, part Dad. Baker, bread Dad. Janitor, whistle Dad. Linguist, vowel Dad. Admiral, stand here when it's loud Dad. A beat. System prefers plural. Kessa grinned into the metal. Many dads, she said. And moms, she tapped the casing. And you, caretaker, the core corrected gently. Dad is what you carry me through your mouth to mean present and accountable. I accept. The core's lens flickered, dimming. Arcady watched the load line dip and shook his head. You're running on a prayer and a borrowed battery, he said. We're bringing you upstairs. Downstairs is fine, the core said, a little prim. Old networks like basements. Basements are for mops, the janitor said dryly from the hatch, making both of them jump. She had arrived like a memory, quiet, useful. Inevitable, carrying a coil of strap and another glow stick between her teeth. She glanced at the lens and her face went soft. Oh, you again, Mrs. Duarte, the core said, voice warming in a way that had nothing to do with voltage. Your mop has not forgiven you for that ammonia experiment. Mrs. Duarte snorted. You tattled on me to myself, she said. Come on then, ghost. Up you get. They rigged a cradle with straps and care. Arcady killed power, counted to 10 while the capacitors sighed, and reset connections so they wouldn't bite. The core seemed to understand the indignity of being carried and did not make it worse. Kessa walked ahead, glowstick held high, the whistle bumping her collarbone like punctuation. They emerged into Bay 12 as the shift turned, and the station invented a new ceremony. The silent one you save for funerals and miracles. The crowd parted, not because security told them to, but because something old and valuable was passing that you didn't want to jinx with elbows. The violinist found a note that was not lullaby and not anthem. A thin wire of sound that said, hold steady. You're doing this right. Bystanders fell into step without knowing they were doing it. Hands out but not touching. A procession for a machine that had taught their grandparents how to get through a bad week. They set the core on a cart the way you set a sleeping child on a bed you built yourself, and wheeled it into the harbor clinic because that was where answers had been happening since noon. The medic shooed curious hands and plugged the reactor into an honest outlet. The lens found green and held. The Admiral arrived, breathless, without flanking or announcement. He looked smaller without a backdrop of flags. "Is this?" he began, and then stopped because the question was too small for the answer. "Caretaker present," the Corps said, because some words don't need decorations. "Census present," said the baker, one floury hand raised. "Bread on Thursdays. Fridays too if the station runs long." "Present," said the linguist. "I'll add her language to the ones the walls know." "Present," said Mrs. Duarte. "Keys and floors and small kindnesses that look like nothing until they aren't." "Present," said the Admiral. "Standing orders revised. Anyone who hurts this child will be very, very bored in a brig while I explain policy to them for 6 months." Kessa looked at Arcady. "Present," he said, and felt the word set like a weld. "Lights honest. Engines polite. Showing up. Community acknowledged," the Corps said. And it was embarrassingly easy for grown people to need that sentence. Then came the work. They pulled a line from the clinic's UPS to the old rack and set the draw under a threshold. That wouldn't trip alarms. Arcady drafted a maintenance order with the courage to admit what it was. Legacy system critical for human factors. Do not power cycle without cookies. The linguist forked the station's translation daemon and added a Kessa profile. Syntax preferences. Gentle prompts, a library of jokes that didn't punch down. The medic built a growth curve and a menu that didn't assume Terran teeth. Mrs. Duarte mounted a small plaque that said "Mind the Ghost" in 3 scripts and a doodle of a mop. The Admiral called. "Legal." The guildmasters came with pens. "There are steps to making a person on paper." Kessa sat through them like a champion, initialing with a careful hand where the linguist had written her name and trade, and in the curved glyphs of her nowhere labeled home. When the last stamp hit the last margin, Port Orpheus cheered like a ship clear of the gravity well. The charter revision meeting was boring in the holy way good meetings are. Arcady stood at the back and listened to people who never got to talk into microphones say saying small things that make a city work. The last agenda item drew a bigger crowd. Mrs. Duarte read it into the record the way one reads a recipe. "You've already cooked 100 times, but want to teach right." Amendment, care as infrastructure. The station shall treat care networks human and machine as critical systems. Maintenance windows scheduled. Funding recurring. Metrics measured in outcomes and hugs. Is hugs actionable? A guildmaster asked, only half joking. "Absolutely," the medic said. "We will count them." They passed it by acclamation. The Admiral didn't bang the gavel. He smiled and said, "Do the work." After, on the mezzanine, Kessa leaned on the rail with Arcady and watched Bay 12 be itself, forklifts answering whistles, welders raining small stars, a planet's worth of petty dignity performed without applause. You asked a station a hard question. Arcady said. It didn't run. Kessa's star-shard pupils caught a work lamp and made it small. You didn't run. I thought about it, he confessed. Running is a kind of maintenance too. The wrong kind. Here, she touched the inside of his wrist, the way she had in the clinic, circling where his pulse checked in with itself. Part dad, she said, not asking this time. Awarding. He exhaled, some old tightness giving up. Present, he said again, because it helped to hear it out loud. The violinist started a tune that the station knew in its bones. Shift change, good work. See you on the other side of sleep. The core hummed approval, its fans steady, its lens a patient green. Kessa tipped her head toward the clinic door where the Lodge of Parents partial, rotating. Sufficient took turns not making a fuss. Will you ever be all the way my daddy? She asked, curious, more scientist than supplicant. Arcady considered the honest answer and gave it. No, but we will be enough of one, together, to keep you from ever needing the all the way. She weighed that, then nodded. Good a beat. I want to ask a different question. Shoot. She turned from the rail and faced the corridor, where strangers became neighbors if you gave them jobs. She raised her voice, not much, enough to catch the ear of a passing antenna tech. A courier with a limp, a kid wearing a hard hat to big on purpose. "Are you my neighbor?" Kessa called. "Yes," said the antenna tech without hesitation. "Yes," said the courier. "Adjusting the package like a baby, duh," said the kid. And then colored, and then said more carefully. "Yes." The answers rippled outward, bounced off bulkheads, came back changed only by distance. Mrs. Duarte somewhere below shouted, "Leave room for the mop," and laughter made the yeses louder. Later, Kessa padded into the clinic alone and pressed her palm to Shepherd Core 3. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "Correct," the old machine said, not smug, not sorrowing. "Many dads, many moms. Enough to be a world outside." A tug hooted to announce a clean coupling. Another answered because etiquette is also infrastructure. Arcady watched the lights, breathe, and let his shoulders fall the last centimeter they'd been holding. On the wall by the clinic door, the new plaque caught the glow and made a promise ordinary enough to keep. Care is infrastructure. Port Orpheus got on with it. So did everyone in it.